They called it the Chamber of Last Nights, a single room inside the castle that promised no dawn for those who dared sleep within it. Soldiers tried, nobles tried, even priests convinced their faith would shield them entered willingly. None survived. Their bodies were always found the same way, rigid, their faces frozen in terror, mouths open as if their last breath had been a scream. No wounds, no poison, no sign of struggle, just the echo of something unseen pressing in on them. The rulers of the castle sealed the door with iron, yet still, whispers spread. Some swore they heard scratching from inside. Others swore they saw shadows slipping out when no door was open. But the most chilling part was not how they died. It was what was left in their eyes. Because every corpse seemed to stare at something only they could see. Something waiting in the dark. So what lived in that room, if it was ever alive at all? The castle had many names over the centuries, but in every chronicle, one chamber remained constant. Hidden deep within its western wing, the room was small, almost unremarkable. No gilded walls, no sacred markings, just stone, a single wooden bed, and a narrow slit of a window overlooking the cliffs below. And yet this room devoured lives. The first recorded death came during the reign of Lord Althric in the 14th century. He wanted proof that his fortress was untouchable, that rumors of a cursed chamber were nothing more than idle gossip meant to undermine him. So he commanded one of his most loyal knights, Sir Reynold, to spend a single night there. Reynold agreed without hesitation, swearing he feared no demon nor phantom. At dusk, he entered the room armed with sword and shield. By dawn, his shield was found upright against the wall, untouched, his sword still in its sheath. Reynold lay dead on the bed, his face twisted in a look so horrifying that even hardened soldiers refused to glance at it twice. Soon after, whispers spread beyond the castle. Tales reached peasants, merchants, and travelers. Some claimed the room was built over an ancient burial ground. Others swore a witch had been sealed within its walls. And there were darker stories still, that the room was never built by human hands at all, but was a gate, a place where something pressed against the veil of the world, waiting for someone foolish enough to open the door. The deaths continued. Servants lured by curiosity, drunken soldiers on dares, even criminals sentenced to a night in the chamber instead of execution. None lasted till dawn. The expressions were always the same. Faces carved in terror, veins darkened, hands locked in desperate defense against nothing visible. Physicians could not explain it. Priests tried blessings, chants, holy water. Nothing worked. The room seemed to swallow every attempt to purify it. By the 16th century, the castle's lords had learned to use the chamber as punishment. Those accused of treason were locked inside. The verdict was always predictable. By morning, the accused was dead. And yet, no one dared call it murder. It was the castle itself that passed judgment. The chamber became both executioner and spectacle. Visitors spoke of hearing muffled cries through the thick door, but when it was forced open, there was only silence and the body left behind. The most haunting testimony came from a scribe who survived longer than any before him. His name was Jareth, a man accused of forging royal decrees. Rather than hang him, the Lord demanded he be sent into the chamber. Jareth carried with him not weapons, but parchment and ink, vowing to record what happened through the night. At dawn, when the guards opened the door, they found Jareth lifeless at the desk. His final writings, smeared in places with trembling strokes, described shadows crawling from the walls, whispering words that were not words. His last line was only 3 words, written over and over in desperation. "It sees me." That phrase was carved into the minds of everyone who read it. What was it? Why had no one else lived long enough to describe it? And more importantly, why did the chamber seem to hunger for more? Every generation found a new victim, a new attempt at explanation, but none could solve the riddle. The deaths kept piling up, and the chamber remained locked until the next desperate soul chose to test it. The castle became infamous. Maps marked it with warnings. Travelers told its tale around fires, and slowly the room transformed from rumor into legend, a place where the bravest went to prove themselves, only to emerge as corpses. The pattern was unbreakable, unstoppable, and yet even as fear spread, so did fascination. Because humans cannot resist mysteries, especially deadly ones. The chamber had become a mirror reflecting our obsession with facing what we cannot understand. And with every corpse it claimed, its reputation only grew darker. What could kill without leaving a single mark, yet leave behind terror so raw it outlived the victim? That question haunted the castle halls for centuries, and it still does today. By the dawn of the 17th century, the castle's chamber had already claimed more than 100 lives. Its reputation was no longer confined to local legends. It had spread across kingdoms, drawing scholars, alchemists, and men of science who believed they could unravel its secrets. If fear gripped the common folk, fascination consumed the learned. They wanted answers, and some were willing to risk their lives to find them. One of the earliest investigations was led by an alchemist named Corvinus. He believed the room was filled with invisible vapors, deadly alchemical residues that suffocated its victims. To test his theory, he sent animals inside, dogs, birds, even rats. Each one survived the first few hours, but by morning, every cage was filled with lifeless bodies. The alchemist entered next, convinced protective herbs and concoctions would shield him. His assistants reported hearing him chanting loudly from within until his voice cracked into screams. When the door was forced open, Corvinus was found with his face half buried in his own manuscripts. His ink splattered into desperate spirals. His last notes made no sense, numbers repeating, circles within circles, as if his hand had been guided by something he could not control. Another investigator, a physician from Prague named Dr. Marek, tried a different approach. He thought the room induced madness, a psychological death rather than a physical one. To prove it, he placed 2 patients inside, men already deemed insane, whose minds were fractured beyond reason. If terror was born in imagination, surely broken minds would be immune. But when dawn came, the guards found the patients dead, their eyes wide with the same unmistakable fear. Madness had not saved them. It had offered them no shield at all. Marek himself disappeared weeks later. Some say he returned to the castle and entered the chamber alone, determined to see for himself. His body was never recovered. These failures did nothing to slow the tide of curiosity. Instead, they sharpened it. Reports began to accumulate. One traveler swore that when he pressed his ear to the door, he heard breathing, slow, steady, as though someone were waiting just beyond the wood. Another insisted that shadows leaked from the cracks, too dark to be tricks of candlelight, but the most unnerving accounts came from the guards themselves. More than one claimed that during their watch, the heavy iron-banded door shuddered, as if struck from the inside, though no sound followed. They said the stone floor beneath their boots seemed to vibrate, like a heartbeat buried in the walls. By the mid-18th century, desperation gave birth to crueler trials. Criminals were chained inside not only as punishment, but as test subjects. They were given crucifixes, relics, even entire shrines dragged into the room to test whether holiness could repel what lurked there. It never worked. The crucifixes were found snapped, the relics overturned, the shrines shattered. One monk declared the room a false creation, a place not touched by God's light at all. His words spread terror through the monastery, and he was silenced by order of the Lord himself. And yet, amid all the certainty of death, there was one account that broke the pattern. A man survived. His name was Calder, a thief condemned to the chamber after stealing from the castle armory. Unlike others, Calder emerged alive at dawn. Guards who opened the door recoiled, expecting another corpse, but instead found him crouched in the corner, still breathing. His eyes darted frantically, and he screamed at the sight of torchlight as though the flame itself were a threat. They dragged him out, but he fought like a feral animal, clawing at the stone, begging to be put back inside. His testimony was rambling, but the scribes preserved every word. Calder spoke of voices layered atop each other, calling his name in tones that shifted between whisper and roar. He described a presence that was not in the room, but in him, something that pressed against his chest, forcing him to breathe when he did not want to, making him blink when he tried not to. It moved me, he said, like a puppet, but the final note of his testimony was the most haunting. Before he died, Calder repeated the same phrase again and again. It's still with me. The chamber seemed to allow Calder to live only to prove a point. Survival was worse than death. His body wasted, his eyes hollowed, his screams echoing through the dungeon long after midnight. Some believed the room had not released him at all, only extended its reach beyond its walls. When he finally died, the guards burned his body, terrified that burial would not contain him. These testimonies deepened the dread. If the room could kill, that was one horror. But if it could claim a survivor, twist his mind, and then discard him half alive, that was something far worse. Scholars argued endlessly. Was the chamber cursed by a witch? Was it a pocket of hell itself? Or was it, as some dared whisper, alive? Whatever truth lay in those stone walls, one fact remained unshaken. No ritual, no science, no strength of will could last a single night. The chamber fed on all who entered, and its appetite was unending. By the late 18th and into the 19th century, the castle was no longer simply a fortress. It had become a destination. The cursed chamber was spoken of in hushed tones across Europe, and with every passing decade, its legend grew darker. Pilgrims of fear arrived, aristocrats eager to prove their courage, scholars desperate to solve the enigma, even showmen hoping to turn death into spectacle. The chamber had claimed more than 3 centuries of lives, but instead of deterring the curious, it seemed to pull them in. The rulers of the castle had long since abandoned attempts to disprove the curse. They began instead to exploit it. Guests who mocked the stories were often invited to spend a night in the chamber. Those who accepted rarely saw sunrise. The lords kept meticulous records, not out of science but out of morbid fascination. Each entry described the same thing: contorted bodies, frozen eyes, and that single, unspoken impression that their final moment was terror itself. In 1803, an Italian noble named Count Silvani arrived with a retinue of servants, declaring loudly that he would sleep in the chamber and awaken unharmed. He wagered a fortune on it, promising gold and land to anyone who dared to bet against him. His servants begged him not to enter, but Silvani was too intoxicated by pride. That night, the door closed behind him. By dawn, his screams had echoed so violently that even those in the furthest towers could not sleep. When the door was opened, Silvani was found twisted on the floor, his fingernails torn to the quick, his face locked in the same petrified stare. Other accounts told of sounds that lingered outside the room. One maid swore that she heard multiple voices calling her name, though the chamber held only one man inside. Another claimed she saw fingers, pale and many-jointed, slip through the crack beneath the door. When she screamed, they withdrew, but the impression of them remained burned in her memory until her dying day. The stories multiplied, each more grotesque than the last, yet all ending with the same undeniable fact: no one truly survived. The 19th century also saw the rise of seances, mediums, and occultists who traveled to the castle convinced that they could confront the chamber. One such woman, Madame Luthien, announced that she would communicate with whatever force resided inside. She was locked in with a table, candles, and her own array of charms. Through the night, guards reported muffled chanting, then frantic knocking, then a sound like furniture dragging across stone. At dawn, silence. When the door was opened, the table was split in half, her charms scattered, and Madame Luthien sat slumped, her eyes rolled back, her mouth frozen, mid-word. She had not survived long enough to finish her sentence. The fascination escalated into obsession. Scholars began to suggest that the chamber was not cursed at all. It was conscious. They argued that its hunger was not blind, but selective. Some noticed that the victims' bodies, though twisted in terror, bore no injury or decay. It was as though their souls had been consumed, leaving flesh behind like discarded shells. The phrase "soul eater" began to appear in journals, and with it the fear that the chamber was not simply a place of death, but a predator in stone. What fueled this belief were accounts of dreams, not from those who entered, but from those who merely slept within the castle walls. Servants complained of visions, dark corridors that bent in impossible angles, whispers of their names in languages they could not understand. They described hands tugging them awake, only for them to discover no one was near. Some awoke with bruises across their arms and legs. It was as though the chamber's influence extended outward, feeding tendrils into the rest of the fortress. The most disturbing incident occurred in 1846, when a group of scholars convinced the castle's lord to allow them to conduct a formal experiment. They chained themselves together, 6 men in total, and entered the chamber as one. Their plan was to resist the influence by strength in numbers, supporting one another through the night. The door was sealed behind them. For hours, muffled conversation echoed, then sudden laughter, then shouts. Witnesses described a crescendo of noise unlike anything human, laughter turning to wails, chanting that devolved into screams. Then silence. When dawn came, the door was unbolted. Inside, the 6 scholars were sprawled across the chamber. Not a single chain remained unbroken. Their journals, scattered on the floor, contained fragments of sentences, most unreadable, some coherent. "It is not inside the room. It is the room. We are already in its mouth. Do not write, it sees through the words." The event horrified even those who had grown numb to the stories. It was not simply that 6 men had died. It was that their bodies showed signs of interaction, as though they had seen and responded to something invisible. From then on, the chamber was declared permanently sealed. doors bolted, walls reinforced. The lords forbade entry under punishment of death, but human curiosity is never so easily silenced. Travelers continued to arrive, begging for a glimpse, bribing guards for access. Some succeeded, and every time they did, the same cycle played out again. A locked door, a night of silence and muffled screams, and in the morning, death without wounds, terror without explanation. What was most unsettling, however, was the pattern that began to emerge in the records. The chamber did not claim lives randomly. Those who entered often reported strange experiences before their final nights. Whispers in empty corridors, the sensation of being followed, reflections in glass that did not move with them. It was as if the chamber chose them long before they stepped inside, as though it reached out across the castle, marking its prey. And once chosen, there was no escape. A guard's diary from 1851 survives, its pages stained with ink and candle wax. He described watching the chamber door all night, swearing he heard footsteps pacing inside, though no one had entered. At one point, he claimed the door opened slightly of its own accord, just enough to reveal darkness beyond, darker than any torch could dispel. He shut it quickly, but in his final entry he wrote, "I dream of it now. The room waits for me." He vanished weeks later, never seen again. The land itself began to change. Shepherds refused to graze their flocks near the castle. Horses reared violently at its gates. Birds avoided its towers, circling wide as if repelled by an unseen force. Villagers spoke of shadows that wandered beyond the walls, long and thin, that vanished when approached. Entire families abandoned their homes, convinced that the chamber's hunger was leaking into the earth, blighting crops and poisoning wells. The castle became a carcass, rotting stone by stone, but at its heart the chamber remained untouched, sealed and waiting. And then came the most chilling whispers of all, that the chamber called its victims back. Descendants of those who had died there claimed to feel dreams pulling them toward the ruins. Or travelers who scoffed at the legends reported sudden compulsions to visit, only to turn pale when they reached the gates. It was no longer simply a place where death occurred. It was a lure, a beacon, dragging the living toward its maw. The people of the surrounding lands began to speak of the room not as cursed, but as living. They said it was not built, but born, that it had a will, and that will was hunger. Priests refused to bless the castle anymore. Soldiers deserted rather than guard its halls. By the end of the 19th century, the fortress had become a place of abandonment, its stones left to crumble, while the chamber sat waiting in the dark. But here is the most haunting thought. If a room can live, if walls can hunger, then what is it truly feeding on? Flesh, souls, or simply fear itself? Because if it is fear that sustains it, then the stories told today, even now, are giving it exactly what it craves. By the dawn of the 20th century, the castle was mostly in ruin. Its walls crumbled, its towers split, its halls empty of nobility. But the chamber remained sealed, untouched by time or weather. Travelers still came, but now their curiosity was mixed with a new kind of fear, modern fear. This was no longer the age of superstition alone. Science had spread its grip, and men of logic scoffed at legends. And so, inevitably, someone decided the chamber should be destroyed. The first attempt came in 1907, when a team of workers was hired to tear down the western wing entirely. They brought hammers, chisels, even explosives. But as they prepared to strike the sealed door, one worker collapsed, his face white as bone. He babbled of hearing his dead mother's voice calling from the other side. Another dropped his tools and fled, never to return. Still, the foreman ordered the work to continue. Charges were set. At dawn, they were lit. The explosion rocked the valley, stones shattering, walls toppling. The chamber did not move. The walls around it cracked, the floors above it buckled, but the room itself remained intact, its door unmarked, its stones unbroken. The workers refused to approach it again. Word spread that night, and by the next day the crew had abandoned the site entirely. The foreman, humiliated, returned weeks later to salvage equipment. He was found hanging from a tree near the castle gates, his face frozen in the same expression as the chamber's victims. World wars swept across Europe, and still the chamber endured. In the 1940s, occupying soldiers discovered the ruin. They mocked the local legends, choosing the chamber as their barracks entertainment. One officer ordered a soldier to spend the night inside, calling it a test of courage. By morning, the soldier was dead. The officer, enraged, tried to prove it was weakness rather than curse. He entered next. His body was found with a pistol in his hand, barrel empty, 6 shots fired at walls that showed no mark. After that, soldiers refused to go near the chamber. Reports circulated through the regiment of strange interference in their radios near the castle, voices overlapping commands, whispers threading through signals. Eventually, the site was abandoned again. The war passed, the world changed, but the chamber remained, silent and waiting. In the decades that followed, governments considered demolishing the castle entirely. Engineers surveyed it, but their reports always returned the same. The chamber's foundation could not be explained. It was as though the room was not part of the original blueprint at all, but something grafted onto the stone, anchored deeper than the earth itself. One architect wrote in his notes, "It is not built upon the castle is built around it." His notes ended there. Days later, he disappeared without explanation. By the late 20th century, urban legends had taken hold. Teenagers dared each other to break into the ruins. Some claimed to have succeeded, though none could prove they had stepped inside. But strange disappearances shadowed these stories. A group of 4 entered in 1972. Only 3 returned, pale and trembling, insisting they had never opened the chamber's door. Yet one of them was missing, never seen again. In 1989, 2 explorers vanished entirely. Their camera was found in the nearby woods, footage undeveloped, the last frame blurred as if something had pressed against the lens. The attempts to end the chamber had failed. Fire, steel, explosives, even war itself, none could erase it. The ruin grew older, the walls fell to dust, but the chamber endured, silent, untouched, waiting for its next visitor. And with every decade, its legend only grew darker, because now it was no longer just history. It was a secret the modern world had inherited, a riddle that refused to die. The late 20th century brought a new kind of intruder to the castle ruins. Technology. Where priests had carried relics and scholars carried journals, modern explorers carried cameras, recorders, and later, digital equipment. They believed that if the chamber could not be explained, it could at least be captured. But what they discovered was that the chamber fought back. In 1993, a team of paranormal investigators brought high-end cameras into the ruins. They set up tripods, infrared sensors, and audio recorders around the chamber door. The equipment worked perfectly in the open air, but the moment one camera was aimed directly at the sealed door, the feed collapsed into static. When they played it back later, the tape had not gone blank. It had recorded something else. Faint shapes like silhouettes pressed against glass, moving behind the door where no movement should have been possible. In 2002, a documentary crew from Germany attempted a full recording of the ruins. They placed microphones and lights throughout the wing. For the first 2 hours, their footage was uneventful, just stone corridors and nervous laughter. But as the night deepened, their cameras began to glitch. Batteries drained in minutes, lenses fogged, and one by one their lights failed. The final minutes showed the crew staring at the chamber door as a low vibration shook the microphones. The audio ended in a high-pitched shriek that technicians later swore was not mechanical feedback, but a human scream buried in the distortion. Even governments became curious. A classified survey was conducted in 2009 when researchers tried to map the chamber with ground-penetrating radar. The scans returned impossible results. Walls that should have existed did not appear, and voids showed where solid stone should have been. In some images, the chamber seemed to stretch deeper than the foundations of the castle itself, as though it continued downward into the earth. When the data was reviewed later, entire files had vanished from the archives, erased with no trace. The technicians responsible swore they had backed them up, yet every copy was gone. By the 2010s, the chamber had become an internet legend. Forums shared grainy photos of the ruins, claiming to show shadows in the windows. Videos circulated of explorers sneaking under the grounds, their audio full of sudden distortions, words twisted backward as if their voices were being replayed by something else. One clip in particular gained infamy, a young man filming the sealed door. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then faintly, a knock from inside. He dropped the camera, and the video cut to black. Days later, his friends reported him missing. He was never found. Others tried live streams, hoping to profit from the legend, but streams cut abruptly, replaced by hours of black screen. Viewers swore they saw faint movement in the dark, shapes bending closer to the lens, though no one was there. One streamer, a woman broadcasting from outside the sealed door, was heard whispering, "It's behind me," before her feed cut forever. Her channel has never been active since. Modern attempts to understand the chamber only reinforced its mystery. Scientists noted that electronics failed near it with unusual consistency, far beyond normal interference. Psychologists observed that those who even visited the castle often reported nightmares for weeks afterward, dreams of standing in an empty stone room, unable to move, as something breathed just behind them. These dreams did not fade quickly. Some claimed they grew stronger the farther they traveled from the castle, as if distance only stretched the thread rather than severed it. The chamber, once a medieval horror, had adapted seamlessly to the modern age. Where once it devoured knights and scribes, it now corrupted cameras, erased data, and haunted screens. It was not confined to stone walls anymore. It traveled in circuits, in signals, in the very devices people carried with them. And perhaps that was the most terrifying truth of all. Because if the chamber could bleed into film, into sound, into code, then no one could ever be certain it was truly contained. Watching it, talking about it, even hearing its story, was that enough to open the door just a little wider? Centuries have passed since the first knight lay dead on the chamber's bed, his face frozen in terror. The castle has rotted, its walls devoured by ivy, its towers broken against the sky. But the chamber remains, unbroken, unchanged, waiting. It has outlasted kings, plagues, wars, and even the age of reason. Time gnaws at stone, yet somehow never at that door. The pattern has never faltered. The bold and the foolish enter. The curious linger too close. The arrogant declare they will prove it false. By dawn they are gone. Their bodies remain, yes, but the essence that animated them, the fire behind their eyes, has been taken. The chamber feeds endlessly, and in feeding it ensures its own immortality. A room that should be forgotten, but instead is remembered more with every telling. That is its secret, perhaps. The chamber is not confined to mortar and stone. It has always been an idea as much as a place. A legend whispered in taverns, a warning in travelogues, a dare among soldiers, a story now told on glowing screens. Every repetition is another breath in its lungs. Every retelling, another heartbeat in its chest. Perhaps it does not need you to enter at all. Perhaps it only needs you to know it exists. Think of Calder, the thief who survived a single night. He said, "It moved me, like a puppet." And remember the guard who wrote in his diary, "The room waits for me." These words echo across centuries, warnings that what the chamber touches, it does not release. Survivors are not spared. They are merely delayed. The chamber does not close its jaws once they step outside. It follows, patient, until they crumble under its weight. And what of us now? Repeating its story once more, we comfort ourselves with distance, telling ourselves it is only a ruin, a curiosity in a far-off land. But distance meant nothing to those who dreamed of it, who felt its pull leagues away. Distance means nothing to circuits and screens, to stories carried on the web. You hear of it, you imagine it, and in imagining it, you step closer to its door. The chamber is not silent tonight. It never is. Even now, it breathes through memory, through rumor, through the story you're hearing. Perhaps you think yourself safe watching from the comfort of your home, but so thought the scholar writing at his desk. So thought the soldier clutching his pistol. Safety is only an illusion outside its walls, because the moment you know its name, it begins to look back, and that is the truth that chills every account, every record, every attempt to bury the tale. The chamber chooses. Not all who hear of it are taken, but some are marked. Marked in their sleep, marked in their thoughts, marked in the way their reflection lingers too long in the mirror. You will not know until the night you wake in darkness, unable to move, certain there is someone in the room with you, not beside your bed, not in your house, but inside you, watching through your eyes. The castle stands abandoned, the chamber sealed in stone. Yet it does not matter, because if a room can live, if fear can feed it, then walls are meaningless. The legend itself is the doorway, and every time the story is told, the door opens a little wider. So ask yourself as the last word fades, when you close your eyes tonight, will you dream of the chamber, or has the chamber already begun to dream of you?